Hey everyone, Brian Beeler and Kevin O'Brien coming to you from the Storage Review Lab, and today we're taking a look at this bad boy, this 3U monster of
26 NVMe bays of goodness.
26 NVMe monster from QSAN. This is the XCubeFAS 3126D all-flash system, and we've worked with QSAN before, but this is new to us, this whole NVMe concept from them.
Yeah, well, this is our first NVMe platform from them, and in the past we worked with them on SATA and SAS. This is just a big step up.
Right, and so, I mean, you can see it's a big physical system, but it's also a dual controller system, so it gives small businesses or small enterprises some redundancy that is a step above something like a traditional NAS in most cases. And it competes at that entry storage price point of somewhere in the $20,000 to get started. So there's a lot of stuff in that space, and it's a difficult place to compete, but it's a great tool for service providers to be able to come into a business and offer a enterprise quality storage system without the massive price tag for all the features that they offer.
Yeah, of course.
All right, so let's take a look at the slides here. We want to get into the hardware overview. Of course, the 26 drives stand out on the front, but there's some other goodness happening here too. Kevin, what stands out to you in the front of the system, at least?
So there's a battery backup unit, and you can tell that it is there and active. I like to yank power of different systems.
All right, well, let's grab this guy.
On here, it actually has a decent amount of weight. There's the has a battery inside and a little storage cache module. So it's a little bit more protection where you're going to find in a traditional entry platform.
If you lose power to the system unexpectedly and you've got it on a UPS fails or runs out, then it's the last ditch effort to catch any data in flight, right?
Yeah, and it's an important element that a lot of the higher enterprise models have, where it doesn't depend on having the UPS attached to the system, even though a lot of the enterprise models might have had that in the past. Now it's a internal lithium-ion battery. If power fails, it has enough time to flush that DRAM to flash storage.
And we'll get into the UI in a little bit, where I imagine there's a safe shutdown methodology built in.
Yes, there is a power off function.
Your preference, though, is something like...
Not always, but sometimes.
So the battery is interesting and useful in that case. On the back side, then, we've got a couple power supplies and two controllers, right?
Yeah, we have our two controllers, and in this picture you can see there are 2 slots per controller for your add-in cards. That would be if you're adding in different Ethernet or fiber channel options. And then you have 2 onboard 10 gig ports, which if you're just doing XCUBE, you can use the entry configuration. But in our case, where we have 32 gig fiber, it adds that in.
All right, let's yank one of those guys out. Actually, while Kevin's doing that, I didn't pull the drives out yet either. So these are the Micron 7300 Pros. So that's their NVMe drive being used. And then we've got a pair of these bad boys inside. So you highlighted the cards, but what else stands out to you?
Well, so, I mean, you have your CPU, you have your RAM, you have your little SATA DOM for the built-in OS. But overall, I mean, it's a very clean layout. It's not like a Supermicro white box server platform, where it's not a platform that you'd find as it could be running a fiber channel platform one day or a compute node another. It's very purpose built. This
fellow.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's got a clean layout and obviously some expansion for RAM, and then the 2 card slots that you highlighted. So there's a lot of opportunity to tune your I/O ports in the system, but everything else is pretty much nice and tidy inside.
Yeah,
and you said it's got airflow, and it's got 10 gig on board, which is somewhat unique in terms of having that already there without having to add in another I/O module.
Yeah, so you have your dedicated management per controller, the 2 onboard Ethernet ports. And then here it really comes down to how you want to configure your platform. And in our case, we have 4 ports of 32 gig fiber on each controller.
Which is moderately insane for a entry storage platform.
Oh, of course.
But we do because we can. So, all right, let's take a look then at the other highlights here from a functionality standpoint and see what else we've got going on from QSAN. So they highlight, of course, we talked about the NVMe already and the cost effectiveness a little bit. The ultra high performance, they're using a lot of high-end I/O ports in addition to the NVMe, and they're quoting 450,000 random write IOPS.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a fairly stout platform. And then again, this is going to come down to how you have your storage configured, what storage options, different RAID offerings. So it just depends on how you're going to be running. But there are up to numbers.
Yeah, like up to a lot of 9s of availability. I don't know exactly how we get there, but that's okay. The point being is it's got dual controllers, it's got the battery backup unit, it's got a lot of things that you need to make sure that you don't lose data.
Yes.
Okay. So we also have, let's see, the high-level specs. So as Kevin was showing you, the CPU inside's an Intel Xeon 6-core, 6 DIMM slots. We're only using 2 in each one of these. So I suppose if you needed a little more memory footprint, you've got some options to expand that. The 26 bays can accommodate 400 terabytes of storage. That's a lot. That's a function of the drive capacity, of course.
Yeah, I mean, those are, it's the big up to number, although at a certain point, if you're investing 26 times, man, I'm trying to think how much those 15 terabyte NVMe drives cost.
Well, those QLC Intel ones are like 2,500 straight, somewhere in there. So
those,
if you don't mind dropping down in performance.
They do require some element of proprietary in there, but I mean, it's nice that you can expand this thing roughly as far as you'd want to go on this type of platform.
Right. Okay. So what else we have going on? We put it in our VMware setup to do performance testing, right? And so just talk quickly before we get all the way into the numbers how we configured the system.
So this particular system, we try to mimic as closely as possible to how other large enterprise platforms will be configured. If you're leveraging NVMe, you're probably not doing RAID 10 storage anymore because you're spending so much for it that if you're taking away half your capacity, it's just, you can get higher performance that way, but people are expecting a platform of this nature in RAID 6 can still perform well.
Right. Okay. So RAID 6, two pools, one per controller, testing both controllers at the same time then?
Yes.
Okay. So as we look at the results then, explain what we have going on here in SQL.
So across the 4 VMs in SQL Server, we average around 18.3 milliseconds. So a pretty close grouping across both controllers. And overall, I mean, it performs pretty well for what this workload presents as storage and I/O footprint on a very cost-effective platform.
Okay.
So in here, we saw around 12,000 transactions per second across our 8 VM workload. And again, it's very nice, consistent across the entire group.
It looks pretty neat and tidy through all the VMs.
Yeah, and it performed really well. So there's some benefit here to, you could run higher workloads, you're going to be ramping up your latency, but for a lot of that SMB or medium business environments where you have some pretty high performance workloads, but maybe not as many, I mean, it performs really well.
Okay.
Now, this is where it gets pretty fun. We're running NVMe storage. We have 2 RAID 6 pools, and we have our 32 gig fiber channel. We're pushing nearly 14 gigabytes per second on a platform that starts at $20,000.
Yeah, that's a pretty good start. Now, of course, we've seen numbers way in excess of that, but also in systems that have
way in excess of that
tens of thousands of dollars of flash inside.
Yes.
Okay.
On the sequential write, this is more of an impact of the RAID 6 write hit, but around 2 gigs per second. On the random read, this is where we came in around 250,000 IOPS read, which, I mean, again, until the very end, I mean, you're looking at a very low latency footprint. I mean, it's really high performance storage for where you'd be coming in. And then on our random write workload, around 130,000 IOPS for our 4K random write area. And again, you're looking at very low latency up until that swing up in at the end of the write profile.
Okay, so in addition to just the performance, though, for an entry storage array, the management, sort of day 2 operations, what do we do with this thing, is a fundamental thing, too.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at the interface and spend some time there.
Okay.
So this you've logged in. This is the entry menu screen.
Yeah, and we have a workload applied. Now this will show you what your real-time activity is in terms of latency, IOPS, throughput. Although
That throughput's pretty sick.
there's a couple of quirks that
Are you
we've
testing a
noticed.
thumb drive on this thing? What do you got going on?
No, so the chart here you can see it's above 2,000 megabytes per second. So we're at 2.02 gigabytes a second.
All right,
But
so just a little bit of a typo.
Yeah.
All right.
So there's a couple little quirks, but nothing too bad.
That's easy to fix. The big question, though, is when you go to set up a volume or a pool, just how does that process work in Xevo compared to other arrays in this price band?
So here we have our two disk pools. Now, when we're looking at other storage platforms, most will lock you into using a specific number of drives, and for that number of drives, you get a couple of different RAID options. It's not just 3 drives, and you can do RAID 5 with. Platforms from like Dell EMC or NetApp or others, you have to follow a specific drive pack size because they sell you X number of drives, and that's the minimum number that you grow your array with.
Okay.
On this, you have more options, so you can pretty much go with whatever you want to roll with. In this case, we're using 2 of our. We have an equal split of all the drives into 2 pools. Each pool is RAID 6. Now you might say, why don't you want to use RAID 10, for example? RAID 10 would provide higher performance, but again, this is it really depends on how you're going to leverage this, and not everyone that wants to have NVMe Flash wants to take half that capacity away just for performance, because you're buying NVMe, you want it to perform well in all the different RAID types, and you still want some resiliency there if a drive fails.
So the other thing is that this is a dual controller system. Do you have a pool for each controller? How are you thinking about availability with this now that you do have the flexibility outside of, say if this was a standard NAS, like a Synology or QNAP, you may just have one controller, right? So in this category, you've got 2. How do you handle storage?
So this, as you build them out, since there's 2 controllers, you can see pool 2 sitting on controller 2, pool 1 is on controller 1, and if a controller goes offline, that is immediately migrate over onto the opposing controller.
Okay.
And from there, we have a volume set up on each of the pools, which then we're pushing out to our host group. And on the host side, this is one where it's not that difficult to set up. There is some, you have to know what you're doing on zoning and create the correct host initiators. But overall, it's a fairly painless process coming into it with zero experience. It's kind of like with a lot of different platforms, you have to kind of know where you're going for on working inside an ecosystem that might have been out there for 10, 15 years. On this, it's pretty straightforward to walk through.
And these, you've just pop these into our VMware environment, so they show up there and are available to whatever servers you've got out there in the system.
Yeah, so once we create our single initiator zoning on our fiber channel switches, we then had different hosts become visible to the array, and then from there we can kind of mention like, okay, this host gets 1 volume or 2 volumes, or you can kind of break it out in that way. And as you can see, I believe one of these guys will start showing that we have our 32 gig fiber active.
Right, and we've talked about before, the system supports a lot of different interface options, so not everyone's going to run 32 gig fiber to this. That might be excessive and skew your cost profile a little bit once you consider the optics, the switch, the other infrastructure required, right?
Yeah, although there are certain platforms where different environments this might move into. You could do a multi-path direct connected interface where instead of using a switch, we've seen this a lot with other vendors where you'll have platforms where by default they're kind of expected to not use a switch. So it kind of splits a little bit differently than a NetApp or a Dell EMC array, where it's supposed to go into a large shared environment. There are some units that go out there. They're designed more for a direct connect approach, where you don't have to worry about the switch cost aspect.
All right, so as we're taking a peek then at the interface, you've got all your fiber channel ports available. You didn't do any Ethernet work with this guy?
No, a lot of these arrays will go with the fastest and best interface. Now they do have onboard 10 gig that's already on board, where you don't have to add in that interface card.
Right.
But in this case, it's shipped with 32 gig fiber. We're going to test with it since it is a large cost aspect of the platform.
Okay. What else stands out to you here? I think, did we end up doing a firmware update on this system?
Yeah, the firmware update process was pretty easy. Under maintenance, you get to see the current firmware build, and you just select the file, apply it. Now, this again, there are some differences in how firmware updates and other management aspects are handled on this array versus others. Some you upload your file, it does a checksum of that file, and then does a maintenance check of the entire array to make sure health is all good across the board. This, you kind of want to know what you're doing, because you can upload your file, apply it, and it starts writing out. It's more expecting that you know what you're doing.
Okay. Well, in a lot of cases, I would imagine that someone's working with a managed services provider or something that will help be doing this work for them, but operate safely is your message.
Yes, a lot of these platforms, it depends on you knowing what you're doing, and that's where a lot of the cost comes in, where you could use it in a multi-tenant environment, but generally it's probably you have your IT provider of many hats, and that single person is managing the array, and you're not having someone kind of step on top of that to do other management aspects. But a lot of these things, you can get yourself into an uncomfortable position if you don't know what you're doing, where some of the other platforms might safeguard those or really force you into, like, you have to drop into multiple modes to get those things to work. On here, a couple of clicks and you could wipe out a storage pool. I mean, there's
so fewer safeties involved in this, but overall the UI, I mean, you're like, from your experience, you've seen a number of these QSAN arrays, although it's been maybe a year since we've had one in, but UI works pretty well for what you need to do.
It looks clean. It works well. It would work on an iPad, for example, to do quick checks or add another volume or something. So you're not locked into using a ancient Java-based program, for example.
Well, and that's part of the benefit of what you get with a QSAN unit like this, is that you're not locked in. We have the drives that are in there. What were they? The
Micron 7300 NVMe.
Okay, so Micron drives. So you could put anything you want in there, and working with the reseller, when you're getting the unit, you could put different drives in there. You could do
for any number of drives,
up to 26, right? And you're getting a dual controller unit, and you're getting this in the entry storage price band of like 20-ish to start, or something like that. I don't want to quote it for them.
Really low. I mean, we've seen other enterprise platforms start at that range, but you're really limited on capacity, you're limited on options, and in certain areas you start moving outside of what that kind of promo package is, and the cost starts to add up. On this, you can pretty much go with whatever you want to, just depending on knowing, like, each port for 32 gig will cost a certain amount, or each added little interface card.
But you get that flexibility, which, if you're looking at, so if we think about what else is in this price band, you've got some NetApp systems that push down, or Dell systems that push down in that $25,000 range. Can you easily get 32 gig fiber and or Ethernet and or drives of your choice in those platforms?
Probably not. They want you to move upstream to get those more premier offerings.
Right. And so when we think about this too, from a dual controller standpoint, how do you compare this to the world of, say, Synology or QNAP or whatever, as they're pushing up into a dual controller system? This will overlap with those types of solutions too, from a price standpoint.
Well, I know Synology, their approach to dual controller systems has been more on the NAS or SCSI side. It's more of an active passive, and you fail a controller and storage is going to be offline for maybe 1 or 2 minutes before it's migrated onto the other controller. On the QNAP side, they have some dual controller offerings. I'm not sure how well they operate in the whole metric of existing in the ecosystem for as long as time as where QSAN and others have been going into, but they're definitely moving their way up.
Well, and you get block and file here too.
Yeah.
All right. So overall, a nice little system for small businesses, small enterprises, distributed enterprises that need something in remote offices or in the factory floor for storage or whatever. that's going to get you into a enterprise system without the big enterprise cost. And working with your local providers to help manage that deployment in that system will solve a lot of those problems and help you get a cost-effective enterprise storage system into your office. So we're pretty big fans of what QSAN's doing. Really like the flexibility that they provide. There's a couple little bumps and bruises that could be touched up in the UI, but that's no big deal, and can easily be resolved with a firmware update. So if you're looking for something in this price range that'll get you NVMe access, start to embrace some of these new technologies, and have all sorts of port flexibility on the back end, it's really worth taking a look at. So thanks for checking out the review.